The sky above the Indonesian archipelago stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of deepening twilight painted in shades of purple and crimson as the sun dipped below the horizon. For the passengers aboard British Airways Flight 9, the evening of the 24th of June 1982 had been unremarkable thus far. They reclined in their seats, some sleeping, others reading, a few enjoying cocktails as the massive Boeing 747-200 powered through the darkness at 37,000 feet. The aircraft, registered as Golf Alpha Yankee Hotel Charlie, was a technological marvel of its era, a 4-engine wide-body jet capable of carrying nearly 400 passengers across vast distances with a reliability that had transformed international air travel. Captain Eric Moody sat in the left seat of the flight deck, his demeanour calm and professional as befitted a pilot with 15,000 hours of flying experience. At 41 years old, Moody exemplified the breed of British Airways captains who had earned their stripes through years of military and commercial aviation service. Beside him, Senior First Officer Roger Greaves occupied the right seat, while Senior Engineer Officer Barry Townley Freeman monitored the complex systems from the flight engineers panel. The three men formed a highly experienced crew, their combined expertise representing decades of aviation knowledge. The Boeing 747-200 they commanded was powered by 4 Rolls-Royce RB211-524 engines, each capable of producing 50,000 pounds of thrust. These turbofan engines represented the cutting edge of British aerospace engineering, known for their reliability and efficiency. The aircraft itself weighed approximately 700,000 pounds, fully loaded, with a wingspan of nearly 200 feet. It was designed to cruise at Mach 0.8 to 5, covering ground at roughly 600 miles per hour, while consuming approximately 13,000 pounds of fuel per hour across all 4 engines. Flight 9 had departed Kuala Lumpur bound for Perth, Australia, then onwards to Auckland, New Zealand, carrying 247 passengers and 16 crew members. The route took them over the Indonesian archipelago, a chain of volcanic islands stretching across thousands of miles of ocean. Unknown to anyone aboard, including the crew, air traffic controllers, and meteorologists monitoring the region, Mount Galunggung in West Java had erupted earlier that day, spewing millions of tons of volcanic ash into the upper atmosphere. The Indonesian volcano had been dormant for decades, and when it explosively awakened, it created an invisible threat that commercial aviation had rarely encountered. Volcanic ash consists of pulverized rock, minerals, and volcanic glass fragments, ranging in size from microscopic particles to pebble-sized chunks. When ejected high into the atmosphere, this ash forms clouds that can reach cruising altitudes and spread across hundreds of miles. Unlike water vapor clouds, volcanic ash clouds are nearly impossible to detect visually at night and do not appear on conventional weather radar because the particles are too fine and dry to reflect the radar signals effectively. At approximately 8:13 in the evening local time, as the 747 cruised smoothly through what appeared to be clear night sky, passengers on the left side of the aircraft began noticing something unusual. St. Elmo's fire, an electrical phenomenon that sometimes occurs around aircraft flying through charged atmospheric conditions, began dancing across the wings and windows. The bluish-white electrical discharge created an eerie glow, fascinating some passengers while alarming others. Those who had flown frequently might have seen this phenomenon before, though it remained relatively rare. On the flight deck, the crew observed the strange electrical display with professional interest but no immediate concern. St. Elmo's fire, while unusual, was a known phenomenon and did not typically indicate danger. The instruments showed normal readings, the engines purred with their characteristic deep rumble, and the aircraft responded perfectly to control inputs. The night was smooth, with no turbulence, no weather radar returns, and no warnings from air traffic control about hazardous conditions ahead. What happened next would become one of the most extraordinary incidents in aviation history. At 8:16, the crew noticed what appeared to be smoke wisps entering the cabin. Then, the number 4 engine, the rightmost power plant on the starboard wing, began to surge and fluctuate. Before anyone could react or begin diagnostic procedures, the engine wound down and failed completely. The sudden loss of power was unmistakable, accompanied by a change in the aircraft's sound and a slight yaw to the right as the asymmetric thrust began pulling the nose. In any multi-engine aircraft, losing one engine is serious but manageable. The Boeing 747 was specifically designed to fly on 3 engines, and pilots trained extensively for such scenarios. Captain Moody immediately began the engine failure procedures, while First Officer Greaves took control of the aircraft, applying rudder to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. Flight engineer Townley Freeman scanned his instruments, searching for indications of what had caused the failure. Had there been a mechanical breakdown? A fuel system problem? A fire? Before they could fully process the first engine failure, number 2 engine, the inboard engine on the port wing, also began surging and then failed. The timeline between failures was measured in seconds, not minutes. The situation had escalated from abnormal to critical with terrifying speed. 2 engines down on opposite sides meant the thrust asymmetry was less severe, but the loss of 50% of their power, while over remote ocean waters, represented a serious emergency. The crew's training took over, suppressing any emotional response in favor of systematic procedures. They needed to identify the problem, attempt to restart the failed engines, and prepare for a possible diversion to the nearest suitable airport. But even as these thoughts formed, the nightmare deepened. Number 1 engine, the outboard engine on the port wing, wound down and quit. 3 engines failed. The mighty 747, designed with redundancy and safety margins that seemed impossible to overcome, now hung in the night sky on a single remaining power plant. The number 3 engine, the only one still running, continued to produce thrust, but its contribution was insufficient to maintain altitude with the aircraft's weight and configuration. The laws of physics were absolute. The 747 began to descend, trading altitude for airspeed to maintain flying speed. Every pilot understands this fundamental relationship. Altitude equals potential energy. Without sufficient thrust, that altitude becomes the only reserve available to keep the wings generating lift. Then, approximately 90 seconds after the first engine failed, the number 3 engine also wound down and stopped. All 4 engines were dead. The enormous aircraft, weighing hundreds of thousands of pounds, became a glider. The cockpit sounds changed dramatically. The constant background roar of the engines, so familiar that it becomes almost unnoticeable, vanished. In its place came an eerie whistling of wind over the airframe and the various electronic warnings chiming and buzzing as systems detected the catastrophic loss of power. Captain Moody's voice came over the passenger address system with a calmness that would later become legendary in aviation circles. His words were measured, understated in that particularly British fashion that conveys seriousness without inducing panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have a small problem. All 4 engines have stopped. We are doing our damnedest to get them going again. I trust you are not in too much distress." The announcement was masterfully crafted, acknowledging the situation honestly while projecting confidence and control. Inside the cockpit, the reality was far more dire than Moody's calm announcement suggested. The 3 men faced a situation that no Boeing 747 crew had ever encountered or trained for. The loss of all 4 engines simultaneously was considered so improbable that it fell into the category of nearly impossible scenarios. The aircraft's designers, the airline's training programs, and the regulatory authorities had all operated under the assumption that while multiple engine failures were possible, total power loss was essentially impossible on a 4-engine aircraft. Without engine power, the 747 lost more than just thrust. The engines drove the hydraulic pumps that powered the flight controls, the electrical generators that supplied power to critical systems, and the pneumatic systems that pressurized the cabin. Backup systems existed, of course. The aircraft had a ram air turbine that could deploy into the slipstream to generate emergency power, and battery reserves could maintain critical systems temporarily. But the situation remained desperate. The immediate priority was to establish the aircraft in a stable glide while attempting to restart the engines. First Officer Greaves pushed the nose down to maintain airspeed, seeking the optimal glide speed that would extract the maximum distance from their altitude. The 747-200 had a glide ratio of approximately 15:1 under ideal conditions, meaning for every mile of altitude, they could theoretically glide 15 miles horizontally. At 37,000 feet, this gave them roughly 7 miles of altitude and potentially over 100 miles of gliding distance, though these were theoretical maximums that would degrade with every mistake or deviation from optimal parameters. Flight engineer Townley Freeman immediately began working through the engine restart procedures. The Rolls-Royce RB-211 engines required specific conditions for an air restart. The aircraft needed to be within certain airspeed and altitude parameters, fuel had to be flowing properly, and the ignition systems had to be functional. Townley Freeman's hands moved across switches and levers with practiced precision, but nothing responded normally. The engines would not relight. The crew requested and received priority handling from Jakarta Air Traffic Control, though explaining their situation proved challenging. A 4-engine airliner with total power loss was unprecedented in the modern jet age. Controllers initially struggled to understand the severity of the situation. The nearest suitable airport was Halim Perdanakusuma Airport in Jakarta, approximately 100 miles away. The crew immediately turned toward Jakarta, though their calculations suggested they might not have sufficient altitude to reach it. As the aircraft descended through 30,000 feet, the cabin began to lose pressurization. Oxygen masks deployed automatically in the passenger cabin, dropping from overhead compartments with a whoosh of compressed air. The sight of hundreds of yellow oxygen masks dangling in the dimly lit cabin transformed the theoretical emergency into a visceral reality for the passengers. Parents grabbed masks for their children, following the safety briefing instructions they had heard countless times. The cabin crew moved through the aisles with remarkable composure, assisting passengers and providing reassurance even as their own training had never prepared them for this scenario. On the flight deck, the 3 pilots donned their oxygen masks and continued working the problem with systematic intensity. Captain Moody maintained radio contact with Jakarta, providing updates on their descent and position. First Officer Greaves flew the aircraft with extraordinary precision, maintaining the optimal glide speed while maneuvering toward Jakarta. Every degree of bank, every foot of altitude, every knot of airspeed mattered now. Flight engineer Townley Freeman continued attempting restarts, cycling through the procedures repeatedly, changing parameters, trying different combinations of switches and settings. The 747 descended through 25,000 feet, then 20,000. The glide was stable, but their rate of descent was approximately 1,000 to 1,500 feet per minute. At this rate, they had perhaps 13 to 15 minutes before reaching the ocean surface. The nearest land was still miles away, and even if they reached the Indonesian coastline, the terrain was mountainous and covered in tropical jungle, offering no survivable landing options. Passengers who understood the gravity of the situation began writing farewell notes to loved ones. Others prayed quietly or held hands with family members and strangers alike. The cabin crew had completed their emergency preparations, ensuring everyone was secured and briefed for a potential water landing. The 747 carried life rafts and flotation devices, but evacuating nearly 250 people into the dark ocean from a sinking aircraft would be catastrophic, even under the best circumstances. At approximately 13,000 feet, as the crew was discussing the possibility of attempting a water landing, something remarkable happened. Flight engineer Townley Freeman, who had been systematically working through restart procedures for what must have felt like an eternity, noticed the number 4 engine beginning to respond. The engine instruments showed movement. The turbine was beginning to spool up. Townley Freeman's voice carried a note of cautious hope as he reported the development to Captain Moody. Within seconds, the number 4 engine achieved stable operation, its familiar roar returning like music to the ears of everyone on the flight deck. A single engine could not restore full power, but it provided precious thrust, slowing their descent and providing hydraulic and electrical power to the aircraft's systems. More importantly, it gave them hope. If one engine could restart, perhaps others would follow. The crew continued working through restart procedures for the remaining engines as they descended through 12,000 feet. The number 3 engine caught next, its restart almost as miraculous as the first. 2 engines running meant they could potentially maintain level flight at lower altitudes and reach Jakarta with some margin for maneuvering. The tension on the flight deck remained high, but the existential dread began to recede. Number 1 engine restarted as they descended through 11,000 feet. 3 engines meant they could climb if necessary, though Captain Moody wisely chose to continue descending toward Jakarta rather than attempting to regain altitude. The number 2 engine, however, refused to restart despite repeated attempts. With 3 engines operating, the aircraft was controllable and capable of reaching Jakarta, though the crew's troubles were far from over. As the 747 descended below 10,000 feet, approaching Jakarta's airspace, the crew encountered a new and terrifying problem. The windscreen, the thick glass panels that formed the cockpit windows, had become almost completely opaque. What had been crystal-clear glass now looked like frosted or sandblasted material, translucent at best, but impossible to see through clearly. Captain Moody and First Officer Greaves found themselves essentially blind, unable to see the runway or any visual references outside the aircraft. Unknown to the crew at that moment, they had flown through an enormous cloud of volcanic ash from Mount Galunggung. The ash particles, consisting of silica and various minerals, had acted like millions of microscopic projectiles, sandblasting the aircraft's exterior surfaces. The windscreen had taken the brunt of this abrasion, with the ash particles literally grinding away the outer layers of glass. The engines had ingested massive quantities of ash, which had melted in the extreme heat of the combustion chambers, forming a glassy coating on the turbine blades and internal components. This molten glass had choked the engines, causing them to flame out. As the aircraft descended into cooler air and the engines cooled, some of the glass coating had cracked and broken away, allowing 3 of the 4 engines to restart. The landing at Jakarta would require Captain Moody to accomplish something few pilots could imagine. Landing a Boeing 747 at night, with 1 engine still failed, after experiencing total power loss, while essentially unable to see forward through the windscreen. The approach would need to be executed largely on instruments, with Moody craning his neck to peer through a small clear section on the side window, while First Officer Greaves called out instrument readings and altitudes. Jakarta approach control provided vectors to line up with the runway, though the controllers still struggled to fully comprehend what the British Airways crew had experienced. Captain Moody requested emergency equipment to be standing by, a standard precaution for any emergency landing. Fire trucks and ambulances positioned themselves along the runway, their crews preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. The approach to Jakarta's runway required Moody to fly a precision instrument approach while simultaneously trying to maintain visual reference through the damaged windscreen. He opened the small sliding window on the left side of the cockpit, the same window used for communication with ground crew during certain ground operations, and attempted to see through the opening. The rush of air into the cockpit made communication difficult, but it provided a limited view. First Officer Greaves called out altitudes, airspeeds, and deviation from the approach path. Flight engineer Townley Freeman monitored the 3 operating engines, ensuring they remained stable and providing the required thrust. The approach speed for a 747 to 200 at their landing weight was approximately 140 knots, fast enough that any error in judgment could prove catastrophic. As the aircraft descended through 1,000 feet, Moody caught glimpses of the approach lights through the small side window and the least damaged portions of the windscreen. The runway was there, straight ahead, but seeing it clearly enough to judge height and distance remained nearly impossible. He relied on the instrument readings, his years of experience, and an extraordinary level of skill that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. At 500 feet, the aircraft was aligned with the runway centerline, descending at the correct rate with airspeed steady. The 3 operating engines provided thrust, while Moody made continuous small adjustments to the flight controls. At 200 feet, he could see the runway environment more clearly through the side window, though his viewing angle was far from ideal. At 100 feet, Moody began the flare, pulling back gently on the control yoke to arrest the descent and transition from a descending approach to the shallow descent angle needed to touch down smoothly. The 747's main landing gear, located in trucks under the wings and fuselage, was designed to absorb the impact of landing, but a hard touchdown could damage the aircraft or cause a bounce that might lead to loss of control. The massive Boeing touched down on Jakarta's runway at approximately 9:15 in the evening, roughly 1 hour after the first engine had failed. The touchdown was firm but controlled, the tires chirping as they made contact with concrete. Moody deployed the thrust reversers on the 3 operating engines, using reverse thrust to slow the aircraft while applying the brakes. The 747 decelerated smoothly, rolling out along the runway as emergency vehicles raced alongside. When the aircraft finally came to a complete stop, the emergency vehicles surrounded it immediately. Moody shut down the 3 engines that had saved them, and the cockpit became quiet once again. The 3 crew members sat for a moment, processing what they had just experienced and accomplished. Behind them, in the passenger cabin, applause erupted as passengers realized they had survived an ordeal that defied the odds. The evacuation was orderly and calm, with passengers and crew exiting the aircraft via stairs rolled up to the doors. Many passengers kissed the ground upon reaching the tarmac, their relief palpable and profound. They had survived what should have been an unsurvivable accident, saved by the skill of their pilots, the resilience of their aircraft, and a measure of luck that defied calculation. The post-flight examination of Golf Alpha Yankee Hotel Charlie revealed the extent of the damage. The aircraft's exterior surfaces were severely abraded, the paint stripped away in many areas. All 4 engines were heavily damaged internally, coated with melted volcanic glass that would require complete overhaul or replacement. The windscreens were indeed sandblasted, nearly opaque. The airframe had sustained damage that would require extensive repairs before the aircraft could return to service. The investigation into the incident revealed that Mount Galungung's eruption had created an ash cloud extending to 45,000 feet, directly in the path of commercial air routes across Indonesia. The ash, invisible to both visual detection and weather radar, had been a perfect trap for unsuspecting aircraft. Flight 9 had flown through the densest part of the ash cloud, ingesting enormous quantities of material into all 4 engines simultaneously. The volcanic ash melted at temperatures around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, well below the operating temperature inside a jet engine's combustion chamber, which reaches approximately 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The molten ash coated turbine blades, combustion chambers, and other internal components, restricting airflow and disrupting combustion until the engines flamed out. As the aircraft descended into colder air and the engines cooled below the ash's melting point, the glass coating became brittle and cracked, allowing 3 engines to restart. The number 2 engine had apparently sustained more severe coating or damage, preventing its restart until later examination and overhaul. The incident prompted immediate changes in aviation safety protocols worldwide. Airlines, aircraft manufacturers, engine manufacturers, and regulatory authorities collaborated to develop procedures for detecting, avoiding, and surviving encounters with volcanic ash. Satellite monitoring systems were enhanced to detect volcanic eruptions and track ash clouds. Weather services began issuing volcanic ash advisories. Flight planning procedures were modified to route aircraft around known or suspected ash clouds. Pilots received training on volcanic ash encounters, including recognition of warning signs and procedures for minimizing engine damage. Captain Eric Moody's understated announcement became legendary in aviation circles, exemplifying grace under pressure and the British tradition of maintaining composure in crisis. His actual words, delivered while facing potential catastrophic failure, showed remarkable leadership and consideration for his passengers' emotional state. Rather than alarming them with the stark reality of their situation, he acknowledged the problem while projecting confidence in the crew's ability to resolve it. The technical achievement of successfully restarting 3 engines at low altitude and then landing the aircraft with severely limited visibility ranks among the most impressive feats of airmanship in commercial aviation history. Moody and his crew demonstrated skills that went beyond standard training, improvising solutions to problems that had never been anticipated. Their systematic approach, clear communication, and refusal to succumb to panic created the conditions that allowed survival. The Boeing 747's design contributed significantly to the successful outcome. The aircraft's four-engine configuration provided redundancy that allowed flight to continue even with multiple failures. The robust construction of the airframe withstood the abrasion from volcanic ash particles without structural failure. The flight control systems, even with degraded hydraulic and electrical power, remained functional enough to allow precise control during the approach and landing. The Rolls-Royce RB211 engines, despite their catastrophic failure due to ash ingestion, proved capable of restarting after the molten glass coating cooled and fractured. This characteristic, unknown before the incident, resulted from the engine's design and materials rather than any intentional feature. Modern engines are now tested for their ability to withstand ash ingestion, and manufacturers have implemented design changes to improve their resilience to volcanic ash. But complete immunity remains impossible. The psychological dimension of the incident deserves consideration as well. The passengers aboard Flight 9 experienced what many thought would be their final moments. The writing of farewell messages, the prayers, the emotional preparation for death, all occurred during those long minutes of descent. The trauma of that experience affected many passengers for years afterward, despite the successful outcome. Some never flew again. Others developed acute anxiety around air travel. The human cost of the incident extended beyond physical injury to include lasting psychological effects. The crew's ability to maintain professional composure while facing their own mortality speaks to the effectiveness of aviation training and the selection of individuals suited to handle extreme stress. All three flight deck crew members had military backgrounds and extensive flying experience, factors that contributed to their performance during the crisis. The cabin crew likewise performed with professionalism that kept passengers as calm as possible under terrifying circumstances. In the aftermath, Captain Moody, First Officer Greaves, and Flight Engineer Townley Freeman received numerous awards and commendations, recognizing their exceptional airmanship. The entire crew was honored by British Airways and aviation organizations worldwide. Their actions became case studies in aviation training programs, teaching future generations of pilots about crisis management, systematic problem-solving, and the importance of maintaining aircraft control even in seemingly hopeless situations. The incident also highlighted gaps in scientific understanding and monitoring of volcanic activity's effects on aviation. Before Flight 9, the interaction between volcanic ash and jet engines was poorly understood. The aviation industry had developed around the assumption that visual detection and weather radar would identify hazardous weather conditions. Volcanic ash, which behaves differently from water-based weather phenomena, exposed this blind spot in the aviation safety system. Subsequent research into volcanic ash characteristics revealed its unique threat profile. The fine particles, often less than 10 microns in diameter, remain suspended in the atmosphere for extended periods and travel hundreds or thousands of miles from the eruption source. The chemical composition, primarily silica, creates the melting and coating problems in jet engines. The abrasive properties damage not only windscreens but also leading edges of wings, engine fan blades, and external sensors. The development of volcanic ash detection and avoidance systems became a priority for the aviation industry. Satellite-based monitoring systems now track volcanic eruptions worldwide in near real time. Specialized meteorological centers issue volcanic ash advisories that pilots and dispatchers use during flight planning. Aircraft manufacturers have researched engine modifications and operating procedures that might allow flight through light ash concentrations or improve the chances of successful engine restart after ash ingestion. Despite these advances, volcanic ash remains a significant threat to aviation. Several subsequent incidents, including the infamous 2010 eruption of Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland that disrupted European air travel for weeks, demonstrated that the aviation industry still struggles to balance safety concerns with operational demands when volcanic ash is present in airspace. The Boeing 747-236B that survived the encounter registration Golf Alpha Yankee Hotel Charlie, was repaired and returned to service with British Airways. The aircraft received new engines, extensive airframe repairs, and replacement windscreens. It continued flying for British Airways until the airline retired it from service years later. The aircraft's survival and successful return to operation testified to both the robust design of the 747 and the quality of the repairs undertaken. For the passengers of Flight 9, the experience created a bond among survivors of a shared ordeal. Some remained in contact for years afterward, gathering occasionally to commemorate their survival and remember the crew who saved them. The incident transformed from a terrifying brush with death into a story of human skill, engineering resilience, and improbable luck. The broader implications for aviation safety culture were significant. The incident reinforced the importance of preparing for scenarios considered highly improbable or even impossible. Training programs expanded to include more emphasis on problem-solving skills and crisis management rather than simply memorizing procedures for anticipated failures. The concept of black swan events, low probability, high-impact occurrences, gained recognition in aviation safety discussions. Engine manufacturers modified their designs to improve resilience to ash ingestion, though complete protection remains unachievable without compromising engine performance in normal operations. The trade-offs between different design priorities, efficiency versus durability, weight versus strength, continue to challenge aerospace engineers. The Flight 9 incident provided real-world data that informed these design decisions. Regulatory authorities updated certification requirements for commercial aircraft to include considerations of volcanic ash encounters. While engines cannot be designed to operate indefinitely in heavy ash, they must demonstrate the ability to withstand specified ash concentrations for limited periods and to restart after ash ingestion causes flameout. These requirements, directly traceable to the lessons of Flight 9, have improved the safety of modern aircraft. The incident also influenced airline operational procedures. Crew resource management training, which emphasizes communication, decision-making, and workload distribution among crew members, incorporated lessons from Flight 9. The way Captain Moody, First Officer Greaves, and Flight Engineer Townley Freeman worked together during the crisis exemplified effective crew coordination. Each member had clear responsibilities, they communicated efficiently, and they supported each other's actions without confusion or conflict. The meteorological community expanded volcanic eruption monitoring capabilities significantly after the incident. The realization that a volcanic eruption on one island could threaten aircraft hundreds of miles away led to international cooperation in tracking volcanic activity and disseminating warnings. Specialized centers now coordinate information about volcanic ash clouds, using satellite imagery, pilot reports, and atmospheric modeling to predict ash cloud movement and concentration. For Captain Eric Moody personally, the incident defined his career and legacy. His calm under pressure, skill in flying the damaged aircraft, and leadership during the crisis established him as one of aviation's most respected figures. His famous announcement to passengers entered aviation lore, quoted and referenced in countless training sessions, articles, and discussions about airmanship and crisis communication. The technical lessons extracted from the incident filled volumes. Engineers analyzed every aspect of the aircraft's performance during the ash encounter. The pattern of engine failures, the sequence in which they failed and restarted, the extent of internal damage, all provided data that improved understanding of engine behavior under extreme conditions. Metallurgical analysis of the damaged engine components revealed how volcanic ash particles behaved at high temperatures and helped identify materials more resistant to ash damage. The aerodynamic effects of the ash coating on the aircraft's surfaces received attention as well. The 747's performance degraded slightly due to increased surface roughness from the ash abrasion, though not enough to significantly affect control. This finding informed research into ice and contamination effects on aircraft performance, contributing to improved models of how surface contamination affects lift and drag. The flight deck visibility issue, caused by the abraded windscreens, prompted research into materials more resistant to particle erosion. Modern aircraft windscreens incorporate harder outer layers that better withstand abrasion, though they remain vulnerable to severe ash exposure. The incident also reinforced the importance of alternative visibility solutions, such as enhanced vision systems and synthetic vision displays, which can provide external references even when forward visibility is compromised. The human factors aspects of the incident provided equally valuable insights: the crew's response to multiple simultaneous system failures, their ability to prioritize tasks effectively, and their maintenance of situational awareness, despite overwhelming circumstances, demonstrated the capabilities of well-trained professionals operating at their best. Analyzing their decision-making process revealed principles applicable to crisis management in many fields beyond aviation. The passengers' experience highlighted the importance of effective emergency communication and cabin crew training. The way cabin crew managed passenger anxiety, provided clear instructions, and prepared the cabin for possible ditching contributed to the orderly evacuation after landing. The passenger briefings, though standard, had actually been internalized by enough passengers that they followed oxygen mask procedures correctly and prepared for emergency landing without panic. As years passed and the aviation industry evolved, Flight 9 remained a touchstone case study. New generations of pilots learned about the incident during training, studying the crew's actions and the technical factors that contributed to both the crisis and the survival. The incident appears in aviation safety textbooks, training manuals, and academic studies as an example of how seemingly impossible situations can be overcome through skill, knowledge, and determination. The incident's legacy extends to current volcanic ash encounters. When other aircraft have encountered ash clouds in subsequent years, lessons learned from Flight 9 have guided crew responses. Procedures for engine restart after ash-induced flameout, developed and refined based on Flight 9's experience, have saved other aircraft and passengers. The International Volcanic Ash Warning System, created largely in response to this incident, has prevented numerous potential disasters by routing aircraft around hazardous ash clouds before they can cause harm. In the final analysis, British Airways Flight 9 represents both the vulnerabilities and capabilities of modern aviation. The vulnerability to unexpected natural phenomena, the limits of technology when confronted with unforeseen conditions, and the potential for catastrophic failure despite multiple redundancies were all exposed. Simultaneously, the incident demonstrated the remarkable capabilities of skilled crews, robust aircraft design, and systematic approach to problem-solving that characterize modern aviation at its best. The story of how Captain Eric Moody and his crew landed a powerless Boeing 747 after flying through a volcanic ash cloud endures as one of aviation's most remarkable survival stories, a testament to human skill confronting nature's raw power and prevailing through a combination of training, experience, and extraordinary composure under pressure that turned potential tragedy into triumph.